The first time I set foot in the desert, I felt as though I had stepped into another world. The heat pressed against me like a living thing, yet the wind carried with it a strange coolness that whispered across the endless dunes. I was 25, still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted from life, and perhaps that was why the desert struck me so deeply. It was vast, unbroken, and yet alive with secrets, much like the questions I carried inside myself. I had come to Middle East on a work program, seeking not just opportunity but adventure, and I remember my first ride from the airport vividly. The city was a dazzling mixture of old and new, skyscrapers shimmering in the sun, their glass reflecting centuries-old stone arches and mosques. But it wasn't the city that pulled at me. It was a horizon, where the streets ended and the desert began, glowing gold beneath the late afternoon sun. They said the desert could humble even the most powerful man. I believed them when I first saw him. The Sheikh arrived at a cultural event I was attending, a gathering meant to celebrate the history of the region. His presence swept across the courtyard like a storm. Tall, poised, and impossibly composed, he moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside. He wore traditional robes, the white fabric catching the fading sunlight, and his keffiyeh framed his strong features. I couldn't tell if it was his eyes or his silence that commanded the most attention, but everyone seemed to wait for him before they themselves remembered to breathe. I had never seen anyone like him. There was something untouchable about the way he carried himself, as if power itself had chosen him as its vessel. And yet, when he paused to greet an elder with a hand pressed to his heart, I saw something softer, a glimpse of a man who understood respect beyond duty. From across the gathering, his gaze brushed mine for the briefest of moments. My heart stumbled in my chest. Perhaps it was only my imagination, but it felt as though he looked directly into me, through me, as though he knew I didn't belong to this place, yet was meant to be here all the same. I turned away quickly, embarrassed at the thought. Who was I, a mere visitor, to think a man like that could notice me? He was a ruler, a leader cloaked in both tradition and mystery. I was just a traveler, wide-eyed and restless, searching for meaning in a land that wasn't mine. But even as the night deepened and the celebration carried on, music echoing, lanterns swaying in the desert breeze, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Like a single grain of sand caught in the wind, I was being pulled toward a destiny I didn't yet understand. Beneath the desert stars, with the Sheikh's presence lingering in my thoughts, I felt the first tug of a story that was only just beginning. The memory of that first evening stayed with me long after I left courtyard, but I never expected our paths to cross again so soon. Fate, however, had its own design. It was 2 days later when my supervisor assigned me to assist with preparations for an upcoming cultural exhibition. My role was hardly glamorous. Coordinating schedules, checking translations, ensuring visitors would have what they needed, but it was work I enjoyed. There was a sense of purpose in helping two worlds meet, in bridging the gaps between languages, traditions, and people. I didn't know then that this very task would place me face to face with him. The palace hall where the exhibition would be hosted was unlike anything I had ever seen. Marble columns stretched toward the high ceilings. Intricate carvings told stories older than I could comprehend, and the light spilling in through colored glass painted the floor in hues of ruby and emerald. I was still lost in wonder when I heard a voice behind me, deep, measured, and carrying the weight of expectation. "Do you find overwhelming?" I turned, and there he was, the Sheikh himself, standing only a few paces away. My throat went dry. Up close, he was even more imposing, not because of the expensive robes or the guards at discreet distance, but because of the calm authority in his gaze. His eyes were sharp, dark as midnight, and I had the uncanny sense he missed nothing. Yes, I managed, my voice sounding far smaller than I wished, but in the best way. It feels like standing inside history. Something flickered at the corner of his lips. Not quite a smile, but not dismissive either. "That is what it is meant to feel like," he said. "These walls hold the weight of centuries. They remind us that our lives are only moments passing through." I nodded, unsure what else to say, until I realized I was staring too long. I dropped my gaze, fumbling with the notepad in my hand. I should get back to work. I'm helping prepare for the exhibition. His eyes lingered on me, curious. "And where is it that you come from?" The question startled me with its directness. "The States. I'm here on a program just for a year." He studied me quietly, and I wondered if I had said something foolish. Then, unexpectedly, his tone softened. "It takes courage to come so far from what you know. The desert is not always kind to strangers." "I'm learning," I said, though my voice carried more honesty than confidence. His gaze didn't leave me, and for the first time, I felt something other than awe. There was kindness there, hidden beneath the steel, a ruler who carried the burden of power, yet still noticed the uncertainty in a young foreigner's stance. Before I could gather my thoughts, one of his advisors appeared, bowing low and speaking in hushed tones. The Sheikh's expression shifted back into command, the softness tucked away as though it had never existed. He gave a nod, then looked back at me briefly. "Do not lose your way in these halls," he said, and with that he was gone. I stood frozen long after, my heart racing as though I had just run across the desert sands. The encounter had been brief, but it left me unsettled. There was something about him I couldn't explain. An invisible pull, a question I didn't know how to ask. Over the next week, I saw him several times from a distance. He would pass through the palace corridor surrounded by attendants, his presence commanding every space. Yet I always caught myself searching for that flicker of softness, the part of him that wasn't the Sheikh, but simply a man. One evening, as preparations grew frantic, I stayed behind late to organize a shipment that had arrived. The corridors were silent, the air heavy with the scent of sandalwood. I was bent over crates when a voice startled me. "You work late." I spun around, nearly dropping my pen. The Sheikh stood there, alone this time, his robe trailing softly against the polished floor. I just wanted to finish this section," I stammered. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate yet without menace. "Dedication is admirable, but you must also learn rest, or the desert will take it from you." There was no lecture in his tone, only quiet concern. And in that moment, I saw again the man beneath the veil of power, the man who noticed, who cared, even if he could never admit it aloud. Our worlds could not have been more different. His life carved from duty, mine driven by the desire for freedom. Yet something in me whispered that the desert does not bring people together without reason. And though I told myself not to think of it, I knew my heart had already started to betray me. I never imagined I would be invited into his private world. Yet one morning the summons arrived as naturally as if it had been inevitable. A messenger approached me while I was reviewing documents for the exhibition. He bowed politely and said, "The Sheikh requests your presence at his estate this afternoon." My first instinct was disbelief. I was an important figure, not an ambassador or scholar, just a young assistant with a restless heart. But there was the invitation written in precise Arabic script, stamped with a seal. I spent the hours until sunset in a blur of nerves, wondering what on earth he could want from me. The car that came for me moved silently through the city, leaving behind the towers and markets until all that was left were open roads stretching into the desert. When we finally turned onto a long driveway lined with palms, my breath caught. Ahead of us rose the Sheikh's palace, an expanse of white stone, domes gleaming gold beneath the fading light, fountains sending arcs of water into the air. It was magnificent, yet not garish. Everything about it spoke of power that did not need to boast. Inside, the grandeur was even more overwhelming. Mosaic tiles sprawled across the floor in intricate patterns. Chandeliers glittered above like captured constellations, and the scent of oud lingered in the air. Every corner seemed to whisper history, every archway a reminder of the legacy he bore. Guards stood discreetly at their posts, their eyes sharp but respectful. Servants moved with quiet efficiency, almost invisible, as though the palace itself breathed through them. I was led to a terrace overlooking a courtyard filled with date palms. There, seated in simple grace despite the extravagance around him, was the Sheikh. He rose when I approached, placing a hand briefly against his chest in greeting. "Welcome. You must forgive the formality of the summons. I wish to thank you for your diligence in preparing the exhibition." I bowed slightly, unsure if words would fail me. "The honor is mine. I only did what I could." His eyes held mine for a moment, then softened. "Come, sit." We sat on low cushions near a table set with tea and fruit. The desert stretched beyond the walls, its golden waves turning crimson under the dying sun. For a while we spoke of ordinary things, the exhibition, the visitors expected, the importance of bridging cultures. His voice carried calm authority. Yet there was an ease that surprised me, as though he appreciated speaking without layers of ceremony. When silence settled, he poured tea into small cups, his movements deliberate. "You see all this," he said quietly, his gaze drifting over the courtyard. "The palace, the guards, the respect of my people. To many it is a dream, but they do not see the chains it weaves." I looked at him, startled. "Chains." He gave a faint smile, though it carried no joy. "Power is a prison, even when built of gold. Every choice I make ripples across thousands of lives. There is no room for hesitation, no space for weakness. At times, I wonder if I am a man at all, or only the title they expect me to be." His words lingered, heavy with truth. In that moment, the veil of power slipped, and I saw him not as a sheik, but as a man burdened by loneliness. I found myself speaking without caution. "But you are still a man. I saw it in the way you honor the elder at the gathering, in the way you notice small things others would ignore. That isn't weakness. It's what makes you human." His eyes flicked to mine, searching, almost disbelieving. Then, slowly, the faintest shadow of a real smile touched his lips. "You speak boldly for someone so young." I felt heat rise in my face. "Forgive me, I didn't mean—" "No," he interrupted gently. "Do not apologize. The truth is rare here, rarer still when spoken without fear." We drank our tea in silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. I could feel something unspoken weaving between us, fragile yet undeniable. The grandeur of the palace, the traditions, the guards, all of it faded in that moment. What remained was a man sitting across from me, and the quiet ache of someone who longed to be seen. When I left the estate that night, the desert air felt different, colder, perhaps, or maybe simply sharper, as though it knew I was carrying away more than I should. For the first time, I sensed that beneath the sheik's veil of power lay not only strength, but solitude, and somehow I had been allowed to glimpse it. In the days that followed, his invitations came more often, though never extravagant or announced with pomp. Sometimes a servant would simply deliver a message that the sheik wished my company in the evening. Other times it was he himself who appeared unexpectedly during my work, his presence causing the room to still, only to ask, almost casually, if I had time to join him later. Each time, I agreed, though I told myself it was curiosity, not anticipation. That drove me. Our friendship took root in quiet places. The first time he asked me to ride with him into the desert, I thought it was a jest. Yet an hour later I found myself astride a horse beside him, the city shrinking behind us as the dunes stretched endlessly ahead. The wind tore my clothes, the sand shifted beneath the horse's hooves, and still he rode with perfect ease, as though the desert itself obeyed him. "You're holding too tight," he called over the rush of the wind, laughter in his voice. "I'd rather hold too tight than fall off." I shouted back, gripping the reins as though my life depended on it. His laughter deepened, free and unguarded, and in that moment he seemed younger, lighter, a man unburdened by titles. When we finally stopped, breathless and covered in sand, he dismounted with effortless grace and offered me his hand. I hesitated only a second before taking it, his grip steady as he helped me down. For a heartbeat, our eyes met, and something unspoken lingered there before he released me. Other nights were slower, softer. We would sit on the terrace of his palace under a canopy of stars, sipping tea sweetened with cardamom. He would tell me stories of the desert, legends of wandering tribes, of oases hidden like jewels, of ancestors who carved life out of sand and sun. I listened, captivated not just by the tales, but by the way he told them, his voice low and steady, carrying centuries of memory. In return, he asked about my world. I told him about the city where I grew up, the streets humming with life, the freedom to choose my own path. I confessed that I didn't always know where that path was leading, only that I wanted to matter. He listened without judgment, his gaze intent, as though my dreams were not small at all, but something worth hearing. One evening, when I admitted my fear of wasting time, that my life would pass without leaving anything of value, He grew thoughtful. Value is not always measured in monuments, he said. Sometimes it is measured in the lives you touch, the hearts you leave less burdened than before. His words stayed with me long after the tea cooled. The more we shared, the more the distance between our worlds seemed to blur. There was humor, too, tucked into our hours together. Once, when he caught me trying to imitate the formal bow of his advisors, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You look like a tree bending in the wrong direction." I nearly spilled my tea laughing, and the sound of his own laughter joined mine, rich and genuine. It wasn't lost on me how rare these moments were. To the world, he was a sheik, impenetrable, commanding, untouchable. But with me, he allowed glimpses of the man beneath, a man who teased, who listened, who longed for something beyond duty. And in turn, I found myself speaking more openly than I ever had, trusting him with thoughts I hadn't voiced to anyone else. Trust, I realized, was growing between us like a fragile flame. Each conversation fed it. Each shared silence sheltered it. I began to understand that friendship was not only possible but inevitable, as though the desert itself had woven our paths together. Yet even as laughter echoed in the halls, even as our rides carried us farther into the sands, I couldn't ignore the quiet truth that pressed at the edges of my heart. I was no longer curious. I was no longer simply honored. I was invested. The Sheikh was no longer just a figure draped in power. He was a friend, and perhaps, though I dared not admit it aloud, something more. It was during one of those evenings, when the palace felt quieter than usual, that I first saw the cracks in his armor. The terrace lanterns glowed softly, the desert beyond swallowed in darkness, and for once his voice carried no stories, no laughter. He sat across from me, untouched tea cooling in front of him, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the horizon. "You are unusually silent tonight," I said, careful not to sound as though I were prying. He exhaled slowly, his hands clasped together. There are nights when silence feels safer than words. Words can betray more than silence ever could. I waited, sensing that pushing him would only make him retreat further. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes darker than I had ever seen them. "My family expects me to marry soon." His tone was even, but each word seemed carved from stone. Not for love, of course. For alliances, politics, to strengthen ties with those who already hold more power than they should. I felt a strange sting in my chest. "And what do you want?" He gave a bitter half-smile. "What I want does not matter. I was born into a role, not given a choice. My life is a contract written before I could speak." The weight of his loneliness pressed heavy between us. For the first time, I saw not the Sheikh who commanded nations, but a man bound in invisible chains, struggling beneath them. "I don't believe that," I said softly. "Choice may be harder for you, but it's still there. To marry for power may keep traditions alive. But what of your own life? Don't you deserve more than duty?" His eyes searched mine, as if testing whether my words were naive or true. "You speak as though love is something I can afford. Here, love is a luxury one people like me cannot indulge in. My people do not need me to be happy. They need me to be strong, to be unyielding. Strength doesn't mean pretending you don't have a heart," I whispered. "Sometimes the greatest strength is choosing what's real, even when the world expects you to wear a mask." His silence stretched, broken only by the quiet rustle of palm leaves in the courtyard below. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, vulnerable in a way I had never heard. "Do you think love is worth risking everything? Worth risking a kingdom?" I hesitated, my own heart thundering. "I think love is the only thing that makes the rest of it worth carrying." For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw something raw flicker across his face. Longing, maybe even fear. He looked away quickly, as though afraid of what I might read in his expression. The following days, I noticed a change in him. He was more guarded when others were present, but when we were alone, he allowed more of himself to emerge. He told me of his childhood, how he had been raised under constant scrutiny, every lesson preparing him to inherit responsibility, how he had envied the village children who could run barefoot in the sand while he memorized treaties and genealogies. "Freedom," he said once with a trace of wonder, "is a thing I have only watched from afar. I have lived surrounded by walls built of duty, tradition, and expectation. But when I watch you speak, when I hear your stories, you remind me that the world can be larger than these walls. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was listen, offering him the one gift no one else seemed able to give: space to be himself. The bond between us deepened in those moments, though neither of us dared name it. Still, the conflict lingered in his eyes. He was torn, constantly, between the man he wanted to be and the Sheikh he was required to remain. I could feel the tension whenever his advisors mentioned marriage, whenever whispers of political deals reached his ears. He would grow distant then, as if fortifying himself, only to return later weary, searching for solace in our late-night conversations. One night, when I found him alone in the library, his head bowed over ancient manuscripts, he spoke without lifting his gaze. "Do you realize what danger it is, letting you this close?" I froze. "Danger?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Not for you, for me. Every time you sit here, every time I allow myself to speak freely, I risk forgetting who I am supposed to be." I stepped closer, heart pounding. Maybe that's not forgetting. Maybe that's remembering. The silence that followed was charged, alive with everything neither of us said aloud. He closed his eyes briefly, as though steadying himself, then rose. "You should go. Tonight, the walls feel too thin." I left, but his words echoed inside me. The walls were indeed thin, and I knew, whether he admitted it or not, that something stronger than duty was beginning to take root between us. The storm came without warning. At first, it was only a whisper on the wind, a faint haze creeping along the horizon. But by the time the palace guards rushed to close the gates, the sky had darkened into a furious shade of copper, and the desert itself rose up like a beast in revolt. A sandstorm unlike any I had ever seen swept down upon us, swallowing the world in a blinding shroud of dust and rage. I had been in the palace library when the first shutters slammed shut, the windows rattled, the lamps flickered, and the air thickened with grit. But it wasn't the storm alone that unsettled the halls. It was the voices, sharp with urgency, echoing through corridors as advisors hurried to and fro. Something more than sand was raging that night. I found him in the council chamber, standing tall despite the chaos around him. His advisors argued in frantic tones, speaking of betrayal, of rumors leaked to foreign press, of political allies now demanding explanations. It seemed that while the desert howled outside, treachery had found its way within. "They claim you've hidden resources meant for your people." One advisor spat. "If you do not act swiftly, you'll be seen as corrupt." The council grows restless. He remained composed, though I saw the tension in his jaw. "And you, do you believe these lies?" His voice was calm, but dangerous. The advisor faltered. Others exchanged uneasy glances. I understood then. When storm struck, loyalty was as fragile as sand in the wind. I didn't think before I spoke. "It's a trap. They're using the storm to feed doubt, to make you look weak. But weakness isn't standing here. It's letting fear decide for you." The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some sharp with disapproval, others incredulous. I was no advisor, no diplomat, merely a guest. Yet I had spoken. His gaze settled on me, steady and unflinching. "And what would you have me do?" "Stand firm," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Because the truth doesn't vanish in a storm. And because the people who know you, the real you, won't doubt where you stand." For a moment, no one moved. Then his expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Not the mask of the Sheikh, but something more human, trust. As the storm battered the palace walls, I remained by his side. While others argued, I listened. While some fled to safety, I stayed in the chamber, helping where I could, fetching documents, steadying lamps when the wind threatened to extinguish them. He noticed. I could feel in the way his eyes met mine across the chaos, as though drawing strength from the simple fact that I hadn't left. Hours passed, the storm raging with relentless fury. By dawn, the winds began to ease, leaving silence heavy as stone. The betrayal, too, had revealed itself for what it was, a ploy by rival factions, desperate to shake his reign. Though the accusations still lingered, the truth had begun to emerge. Documents were recovered, Testimonies gathered. It was not victory I remembered most. It was the night itself, the unspoken bond forged in the heart of the storm. Later, when the palace finally quieted and exhaustion pressed heavy upon us, he asked me to walk with him onto the terrace. The air still smelled of dust, the sky muted and pale. He stood there in silence for a long time before speaking. "Do you know," he said slowly, "that in times like this, I trust no one? Not even the men who swear loyalty to me. Their allegiance shifts with the winds. But last night you stayed. I couldn't leave," I admitted. "Not when you needed someone to see you. Not the Sheikh, not the ruler, but you." His eyes softened, and the weariness in them cut deeper than any storm. "And you do see me, more clearly than I see myself at times." The words hung between us, fragile yet powerful. I felt the gravity of them, the shift in the ground beneath my feet. What had begun as curiosity, then friendship, had grown into something unshakable. The storm had tested us, and in its wake, it left behind a bond that neither betrayal nor desert winds could erode. For the first time, I realized that my place was not simply beside him as a guest or a companion. It was beside him as someone who knew the man beneath the veil of power, and who chose to stay no matter how fierce the storm became. And for the first time, he let me see the depth of his gratitude, not with words, but in the quiet way his hand brushed against mine as we turned back inside, the faintest touch, enough to make the whole desert seem to hold its breath. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the halls of the palace. Sand still clung to the corners of the courtyards, drifts piled like forgotten memories. The servants moved quietly, the advisors whispered, and though order returned, something had shifted, not only in the kingdom, but in him. In the days that followed, he was different, not weaker, not shaken, but more contemplative. I saw it in the way he lingered at windows, gazing out at the horizon, in the pauses between meetings, when silence seemed heavier than words. He had faced betrayal, but that wasn't what troubled him most. It was a choice now before him, the path of duty or something more dangerous, more fragile, the path of the heart. I felt it too, though I tried to bury it. I knew what it meant to remain close to him. The palace was a stage, its courtyards filled with eyes that saw everything, judged everything. I was already the subject of whispered rumors. To stay longer was to invite suspicion, and suspicion was poison in a place where loyalty was currency. One evening, I found myself pacing in the guest chambers, a letter half written on the desk before me. I had written 3 times already, each draft torn apart before the ink dried. This one, I told myself, would be final. I would thank him for his kindness, for his trust, for allowing me to see a world I could never have imagined. And then I would leave. Better to go now, I reasoned, before I became a burden to him, before I became a weakness others could exploit. But my hand trembled over the parchment, the words blurring. Leaving felt like tearing something alive from my chest. The bond we had built wasn't something I could walk away from lightly. And yet, wasn't that what love sometimes required? The sacrifice of self, so the other could be free? I sealed the letter and set it aside, deciding to give it to him the next day. That night, as the palace slept, I walked in the courtyard, needing air, needing clarity. The moonlight turned the marble pale silver, the fountains quiet, the desert beyond stretching vast and infinite. I thought I was alone, until I heard his voice. "You were going to leave." I turned, startled. He was standing by one of the columns, shadows softening the sharp lines of his face. He had no guards, no advisors, just the weight of truth in his eyes. My voice faltered. "It would be easier for you if I did." Easier. He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "Since when do I ask for ease? My life has been nothing but duty, meetings, alliances, treaties, expectations. Everything decided before I could breathe. I never chose any of it. But you," he stopped, searching for words. "You are not duty. You are choice. Mine." My heart hammered, every part of me torn between disbelief and hope. "But your people, your position, mean nothing if I live without honesty." His tone cracked, raw with sincerity. "What is a ruler worth if he is a hollow man inside? They see me as Sheikh, as ruler, as symbol. You," he took a breath, his eyes holding mine. You see me as I am, and that, more than anything, is what I cannot let go. The world seemed to still, the desert winds, the distant hum of night. Everything faded until only his voice, his presence, remained. I tried to ignore it, he continued softly. I told myself it was a passing feeling, that I could bury it beneath responsibility. But the storm proved me wrong. When everyone doubted, you stayed. When I was at my weakest, you stood by me, and in that moment I knew, you are not my weakness. You are my strength. I felt tears sting my eyes, though I tried to blink them away. You don't know what you're asking. If you choose this, choose me, you risk everything. Then let me risk it. His voice was firm, resolute. Because what is the worth of power if I cannot choose the one who gives me peace? What is the point of legacy if it leaves me empty? For the first time, I want something not for my kingdom, not for my family, but for myself. I want you. The word struck me like lightning, fierce and undeniable. He wasn't promising me a fairy tale. He wasn't offering me crowns or kingdoms. He was offering me himself, vulnerable, unguarded, sincere. I stepped closer, the distance between us vanishing until I could see the tremor in his breath, the raw honesty in his gaze. Then know this, I whispered, voice thick with emotion. I stayed because I saw you, and I will keep staying, not because of what you are, but because of who you are. His hand lifted, hesitating only for a moment before it brushed against mine. Not a command, not a claim, just a quiet, reverent touch. In that moment, no titles existed, no walls, no storms. Only two souls choosing each other against the weight of the world. And for the first time, I believed, not in destiny, not in duty, but in love, the kind that asked for nothing but honesty and gave everything in return. Years have a way of softening even the sharpest edges of memory. Looking back now, the storm that once threatened to tear us apart feels like a distant test, one we had to endure in order to step fully into the lives we live today. It did not happen all at once, of course. Nothing worthwhile ever does. When he first chose to speak openly, to confess not as a sheikh, but as a man, the walls of the palace did not magically fall away. There were whispers, criticisms, eyes that followed us, weighing every glance, every gesture, against centuries of expectation. Some called me an outsider. Others feared what my presence might mean for tradition, for alliances, for the careful balance of power. But he did not waver. That was the difference. The man who once shouldered his burdens in silence now carried them with conviction. Let them speak, he would tell me, his hand brushing against mine when no one else dared to look. They see a ruler bound by power. I will show them a ruler strengthened by love. And slowly, the world began to shift. At first, the court was stiff, uncertain. Formal dinners where the air was heavy with disapproval became evenings of gradual acceptance. Some of the elders, once so rigid, began to see the change in him. The way he smiled more easily, the way his decisions carried not just calculation but compassion. They realized he was not weakened by me. He was steadied. The people, too, noticed. Rumors gave way to stories to quiet respect. In the markets, where I once felt the sting of being stared at, children now ran past me laughing. Merchants offered greetings without hesitation. It was not universal, not immediate, but it was progress. And progress, in a land built on tradition, is nothing short of extraordinary. Through it all, I learned what it meant to live both within and outside of a veil. His life had always been one of veils, of ceremony, expectation, masks worn for the sake of duty. But with me, those veils lifted, and beneath them, I discovered not just the weight of his power, but the depth of his humanity. Our days became a rhythm, a blend of two worlds. In the mornings, he carried out his responsibilities, balancing politics with tradition, making decisions that shaped thousands of lives. I often sat nearby, not as an advisor, but as a quiet anchor, someone who reminded him that beneath the signatures and decrees, he was still a man capable of laughter, of longing, of love. In the afternoons, when the desert heat softened, we would escape. Sometimes it was the dunes, where the horizon stretched endlessly and we rode together, the horses' hooves thundering like our own unspoken joy. Other times it was the gardens, where jasmine bloomed and fountains sang. and he would listen as I read to him, or as I spoke of the small dreams I carried before fate had woven mine with his. He never tired of hearing about them, my old ambitions, my wanderings, the person I had been before I met him. You remind me, he would say, that a life is not meant to be lived in chains, even golden ones. At night, when the palace quieted and the stars spread vast above us, we would sit with tea, speaking of nothing and everything. Those were the moments I cherished most. Not the grandeur, not the titles, but the silence between words. Because it was in that silence I felt most at home. Still, it was not without struggle. There were moments when the resistance was sharp. An official refusing to acknowledge me, an elder questioning his choice, a journalist twisting our story into something scandalous. Each time, I would wonder if I was too much, if my presence was too heavy a burden for him to carry. But every time, he answered with the same quiet strength, by choosing me again, publicly, privately always, and slowly. Even the loudest voices realized there was no breaking what had already been forged in storms and silence alike. Years have passed now, enough that the resistance has dulled into acceptance. We walk more freely through the city, hand in hand, and though some still whisper, many now smile. Change is never swift, but it is steady, and with each step, we are proof that love can weave its way even into the most guarded traditions. I often think back to the person I was when I first arrived here, a wanderer, curious and uncertain, standing in awe of the desert winds. I had expected beauty, mystery, perhaps even danger. I had not expected him. I had not expected that behind the veils of duty and power was a man searching just as I was, for meaning, for connection, for something real. The last time I stood on the edge of the desert at sunset, the sky painted in fire and gold, he was beside me, the palace behind us, the horizon before us, his hand in mine. We stood in silence, watching the light fade into the soft embrace of night. And in that moment, I understood something I had struggled to name before. I had not merely found love here, in this place so far from where I began. I had found a home, not in walls or palaces, not in titles or duties, but in the soul of the man who once seemed untouchable, the man who, beneath every veil of power, was simply himself. I turned to him then, my voice soft but certain. Beneath the veil of power, I whispered, I found not a ruler, but the man who became my home. His fingers tightened gently around mine, and together we stepped forward into the desert twilight, hand in hand, free.